Live from Austin, Texas, broadcasting worldwide, it's Alex Jones.
I have one of the top coordinators of the John Birch Society joining us for a couple segments coming up in about 20 minutes to talk about the danger of a constitutional convention. I know it sounds like a good way to get things done, but they could totally rewrite the whole Constitution during one. They'd probably stage a big crisis in the middle of one. So we're going to look at that and how far we've come exposing globalism. I wanted to get Robert Brown on because I've seen his research and seen some of the speeches he's given. He is a coordinator and regional field director for the John Birch Society, covering Montana, Wyoming, North Dakota, and South Dakota. He's best known for his lectures on the Constitution. He's produced 6 of the lectures on DVD series known as The Constitution is the Solution, which is gaining popularity nationwide. He and his family reside in Billings, Montana, and they're battling to wake folks up and defend the Republic. But I wanted to get him on to in general, talk about his view of the Trump revolution, other populist constitutional revolutions happening, and what he is concerned might derail it or how they might sucker punch us. Because I've seen a lot of people that I respect and like pushing a constitutional convention. So we should talk about what those are briefly as a solution to fully retake the country. Well, we're already beginning to do it at the state level and culturally, and at the federal level. We have the trifecta now as soon as we dig out the Republican establishment. So I tend to lean his direction that a constitutional convention is one of the only things the globalists could use to try to overturn the Constitution and Bill of Rights. But let's get his take on that right now. Robert Brown, jbs.org. What is your expert analysis on this?
My concern here is that in today's political environment, this would be the exactly wrong thing to be doing, to be having an Article 5 constitutional convention. I look back to the expertise of James Madison, where in his day, he was very concerned about a growing movement in his time to have a constitutional convention to make changes to the new Constitution they just established. And his main concerns he pointed to was the present temper of America and the present ferment of parties. There was such political discord at the time, he thought that opening up the Constitution for another convention would just lead to chaos. And I have to ask, are we in any better circumstance today? Do we have better political harmony, or are we in political discord again? I think the answer on that one's quite clear. It would be absolute chaos. Of course, all the lobbyists would be vying for position on getting their ideas into the new changes of the Constitution. So in today's political environment, this is a crazy idea. In addition to that, I think Justice Scalia said it best when he said, this is not a good century to write a constitution. And I would back that up with my own experience, that as I've traveled around the country speaking on the Constitution, I find most people, even those that are politically active, are pretty ignorant of what the Constitution already says. And so the types of amendments they tend to come up with tend to do more damage than good because they are not sure of the Constitution they're cutting into.
That's right. It was written by geniuses, marveled at around the world by other statesmen and researchers to really bind down corruption and gangs and monopolies and try to create a system, a platform to empower humanity. Didn't mean they were perfect in their time, but the idea is the bane of globalists, the bane of tyrants, and it's why we see globalist organizations for decades pushing a con. And as you said, you see their whole plan to destabilize the country. They would take a con as the time to launch their Bolshevik-style revolution that they're already trying to push right now.
Absolutely. Whereas those of us who value liberty, we don't have any need for any changes to the Constitution. Simply enforcing what it already says would make massive inroads towards restabilizing our country, creating financial prosperity.
It's like a submarine. It's not broken if the doors are open and you go underwater and it floods. You got to close the doors.
Yeah, precisely. And so as I look at things here, one of the things the Founding Fathers did point to is in times where the Constitution is just being ignored, they never pointed to using Article 5 to make changes to the Constitution. What they always pointed to was constitutional enforcement. As a classic example of this, the Alien and Sedition Acts of 1798, which were clear violations of, among other things, our freedom of speech. It made it illegal to speak against the actions of the president or Congress. Madison and Jefferson, recognizing this was a great encroachment against the clear meaning of the Constitution, didn't say, we need to change the Constitution. They said, we need to enforce the Constitution. They came up with the the Kentucky and Virginia resolution.
That's right. You don't need a new constitution just because they're ignoring the old one. They're going to ignore the new one.
Precisely. I compare this often to, imagine having a sporting game where none of the refs have ever read the rules and have very little idea of how the game's supposed to be played. And so most of the players have never bothered reading the rules either. They know they don't need to follow.
So they say, let's write new rules.
Right. Oh, let's write new rules. We're not using the ones we already have. That's what's going on with the people and Congress. The people are supposed to be, as Hamilton put it, the natural guardians of the Constitution. We're the ones that are ultimately the final rep on whether the Constitution is being followed or not. And yet none of us know what it says. Nobody generally has much idea of the Constitution. I often run Constitution quizzes around the country, and you're hard-pressed to find anyone that can even get a passing grade on it because we're ignorant of the Constitution. And as long as we don't know the rules, they don't have to follow them. Exactly.
Let me ask you this question. Until recently, you usually didn't hear conservatives push con-cons. Now I'm hearing more and more from Fox News. You know, I've had guests on, heard their perspective on how it's needed, and I've overall disagreed with them. I mean, I could see how there was a total awakening. You know, we could, you know, perhaps have a few new things for things that are more modern, but don't change anything that's old because it's worked so well. But why suddenly are more and more conservatives pushing it?
Unfortunately, I think a lot of them are getting desperate and see this as a great idea. It's being portrayed in ways that I don't think are realistic, though. If you were to honestly pull up the anchor of our Constitution right now and drift to the center of political thought, would that move us closer to the mindset of Madison or Marx versus back in 1787 when it was written? Obviously, our nation has moved far in the wrong direction, and it's a very dangerous political environment. We don't understand the history like the Founding Fathers did to create the Constitution as they did.
And look, Confederate general stuff, I'm like Charles Barkley and others. I mean, who even pays attention to that? But it's being brought up to tear that down and then say, oh, the American flag flew over slavery, get rid of it, get rid of the Constitution. And now, just a few years later, what we predict is true. The left is saying the country's bad, the Bill of Rights is bad, the Constitution's bad. In England, they're saying get rid of the whole government, it's racist too, because it actually is protecting the people and has those rights enshrined that weren't given by government but were only pointed out by the constitutions. This is a direct globalist war on the nation state to replace it with the UN system where you have absolutely no rights.
Absolutely. You know, one thing I often look at here is the left has a tremendous amount to gain by making changes to the Constitution, whereas on the right, those of us that value limited government, we couldn't do better than the provisions that are currently in the Constitution. Take, for example, the push for a balanced budget amendment. If we're to
Tell us about that. Robert Brown of the JBS, one of their top constitutional educators out there over a 4-state area. We're going to come back and get his take on this and other angles and other attack plans of a con. Stay with us. But Robert Brown is the coordinator of the regional field director of the John Birch Society, covering 4 states, who, again, is one of the first organizations to expose the globalist conspiracy back in the 1950s when we discovered the CIA had actually put Mao Zedong into power. That's how the John Birch Society started. People are like, what? And now it's all been proven. It's all been declassified. It's just crazy. So he's a historian on this, jbs.org, getting into the dangers of con. Finish up with the dangers of the con, and then other threats you see. If this was a ball game where you'd see Team America, Team Republic versus Team Soros, Team Globalist, and where in history you think we are right now in your view of Trump?
Very good questions. Where we left off, first of all, was my explanation that really the left has a tremendous amount to gain from making changes to the Constitution, whereas those of us that believe in limited government couldn't do better than the enumeration of powers, for example. On the one hand, we have people pushing for a balanced budget amendment, which would only say Congress can't spend more than they take in. Instead of that, if we were to get back to Congress only spending money on the enumeration of powers, you would see a reduction of over 80% of federal spending. You'd see a surplus annually of over $2 trillion. So much better. And it would also rein the federal government back to what they're actually supposed to be doing within their jurisdiction. So it doesn't have any comparison here, what they're trying to accomplish through a convention versus what the Constitution already says. But the other thing I want to really focus on is, as constitutionalists, originalists, conservatives, we really have 2 angles of attack to get back to the Constitution. And both of them begin with we the people. We need to understand the Constitution and demand adherence to it. And as more and more of us do that, we have two angles where we can attack big government and rein it back in. The first one is state legislatures. You've heard many times of the concept of state nullification, which is exactly what Madison and Jefferson turned to with the Alien and Sedition Acts. They said the states need to refuse to comply with this. In fact, Hamilton in Federalist 16 says, if the cooperation of state legislatures is necessary to give effect to a measure of the Union, they have only not to act or act evasively, and the measures defeat it. And that accounts for a majority of federal programs. They require the states to help implement them. So if the states are concerned of the federal government overstepping their bounds, stop helping them. That's the first step. But in addition to that angle of attack working through the states and nullification, the other is the people directly holding their members of Congress accountable. I cover this in a video that can be found on YouTube called The Power of 500, where we found that a team of about 500 people in a congressional district is enough political sway that when they're working coordinated in holding their elected officials accountable to the Constitution, it has a tremendous effect on them. We did that with my own congressman in Montana a few years ago. Within a few months, he began following the Constitution very well because he felt tremendous pressure from the people. So these are the most powerful tools we have. Number one, the state legislatures, and number two, the people themselves. In fact, Madison referred to the people themselves as the ultimate redress of constitutional violations. These are where we really need to be focusing. And it starts with the people understanding the Constitution, which is why, as you mentioned in my introduction there, we produced this video series, The Constitution is the Solution, to help people become familiar with the important points of the Constitution that they need to know to rein the federal government back into their jurisdiction. If the federal government were following the Constitution, the enumerated powers, they wouldn't be involved in most of what they are doing and most of the areas where we feel oppression coming from them. So that's ultimately the real solution I see. We're at that transition period where if we work enough to help educate enough people, we can turn things in the right direction. But without that, the statement from Thomas Jefferson comes to mind: if a nation expects to be ignorant and free, it expects what never was and never will be. There's nothing we can do to get our nation back on track without the American people understanding these principles of liberty and the Constitution.
And that was my next question 2 or 3 minutes ago listening to you. The Democrats and the globalists admit they want to dumb down population. They write white papers, 2 + 2 = 5, Common Core. They know they can't beat free market. They know they can't beat the Constitution. They know they can't beat the weapon of the Renaissance, the flower of 1798. They know. And so they just ruthlessly want to create dependency and ignorance. So you're right. You educate the people in the basics of liberty and freedom and history, to paraphrase Jefferson, and tyrants will vanish like phantoms at dawn. The problem is that they know we're winning now. I mean, you go back to the 1950s when the John Birch Society was founded by mainly patriots in government and others who were actually aware of the plan to turn us into a communist/socialist program. Imagine how small that started, and now in 2017, we're beginning to get the upper hand. But, you know, the winds could change very quickly. The enemy could pull off some really dirty tricks. They've already been trying it. We're forcing them to accelerate their authoritarian plan. So I see a major violent collision, not by us, but by them in the near future. Soros was giving $500 million a year to try to bring down the U.S. Now he just put $18 billion in. His people literally are actively trying to destroy me and everybody else. I mean, these are monstrous people. So just getting off the Constitution and taking off your professor hat, looking at Trump, why do they hate him so much? I know he's more of a pragmatist. He's just not out to get America. He believes in some basic Americana. That shows you how bad Hillary would have been, that they're just horrified of Trump. Where do you see that battle going in the few minutes we have left?
Well, speaking of George Soros, for example, we see George Soros-funded organizations on both sides of this battle on changing the Constitution. We see some of them saying, no, we do not want to have an Article 5 convention. We see others that are saying, yes, we do, like Wolfpack. He's playing and funding both sides of this battle. That says something. And I think you could do some interesting analysis on what he might be able to gain from that, funding both sides of the battle. But ultimately, this is the real issue. We, the people, are the greatest power in this country. And as you're saying, we're starting to see an awakening This has got them terrified. If the American people, enough of us, wake up, their game is over. And that is really our mission in yours as well as the John Birch Society, to wake people up to what is really going on, to have enough people standing up to what's going on. Otherwise, and this is really a race to the finish, if we can wake up enough people in time, we win. If not, they win. That's ultimately what it comes down to.
You're absolutely right. And look, Hillary had $2 billion. Trump had $400 million. He beat her. We have a few $1 million. They have $18 billion. But force feeding us propaganda is backfiring now. And so just because Soros is all in, throwing a fit with all his stolen money from every scam you can imagine, currency speculation, bringing countries down, funding revolutions against elected governments. I mean, they've got indictments out for him in multiple nations. So don't be intimidated, folks. This is a desperation move by this monster and his cohorts. We are winning because we're promoting freedom. And when you take action, and when you speak out, and when you get involved, like Robert Brown's doing, nothing on earth can stop us. And most importantly, pray to God for providence. We will defeat this old, wicked Nazi collaborator. We will defeat the globalist. Their system, once identified, will never flourish. It's an authoritarian, planetary plan. They were so delusional. They thought we were so dumb that no one would ever study the plan. And now the work of the John Birch Society has gone from one person to planetary awakening to the globalist system. And that's why they're a very small but focused organization. And that's why I always support the work they've done. Robert Brown, great job. Thank you so much. God bless you.
Thank you for having me.
We'll be back with the latest news and information. Gerald Celente, your phone calls, and a lot more. I'm Alex Jones. This is the InfoWar.